Regular meeting of the Troy Planning Commission. This Planning Commission consists of 9 residents of the City of Troy appointed by the Mayor and confirmed by a Troy City Council. Attending tonight's meeting in addition to the Commission is our planning staff, our City Attorney, and our planning consultant. At the appropriate time, anyone wishing to speak to the Planning Commission should sign in at the podium here, identify yourself, and tell us your concern. In the meantime, if you have any communication devices, please either turn them off or put them on vibrate. With that, the first item on the agenda tonight is the roll call. Kathy, would you call roll, or is that Brent? Brent, would you call roll, please?
Mr. Edmonds.
Here.
Mr. Hudson.
Here.
Mr. Krent.
Here.
Mr. Maxwell.
Here.
Mr. Sanzika. Mr. Schultz.
Here.
Mr. Stratt.
Here.
Mr. Tagle.
Here.
Mr. Allman.
Here. We have a quorum. I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda tonight. It was Mr. Schultz, second by Mr. Stratt. Any discussion? If not, roll call, please.
Mr. Hudson.
Yes.
Mr. Krent.
Yes.
Mr. Maxwell.
Yes.
Mr. Schultz.
Yes.
Mr. Stratt.
Yes.
Mr. Tagle.
Yes.
Mr. Allman.
Yes.
Mr. Edmonds.
Yes. You've been given a copy of the April 26, 2011 special study session minutes. Are there any additions or corrections to those minutes? If not, Mr. Edmonds?
I move to approve as published.
Support by Mr. Schultz. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Krent.
Yes.
Mr. Maxwell.
Yes.
Mr. Schultz.
Yes.
Mr. Stratt.
Yes.
Mr. Tagle.
Yes.
Mr. Allman.
Yes.
Mr. Edmonds.
Yes.
Mr. Hudson.
Yes. Minutes are approved. This is a spot on the agenda for public comment on items which are not on the agenda tonight. Does anybody wish to address us concerning something not on the agenda? Seeing no one, let's go to item number 5, which is a preliminary site plan review, file number SP 343D. Proposed site improvements on the north side of Big Beaver, west of Crooks, which is 1500 West Big Beaver, Section 20, Zoned 01, which is low-rise office district. Mr. Brannigan, are you going to make a presentation?
Yes. Sorry, just getting my things together after putting those agendas on your machine. 1500 West Big Beaver, what we're essentially looking at is an amendment to an existing site plan to expand the parking area that exists on the site now. This application was received prior to the adoption of the new zoning ordinance. You know that parking in the front yard and arrangement of parking has changed on Big Beaver in the new ordinance, but this is processed under the old ordinance, and what they're permitting, I'm going to demonstrate to you, is permissible under the ordinance. So the submittal included everything we needed for preliminary site plan approval. You'll notice that my review is just in a memorandum format because all they're doing is expanding the parking. There's no change in use or anything. The parking area that they're proposing would expand the permitted parking, or would expand the on-site parking to what's required under the old ordinance. Right now, they're technically under on parking if you use just the straight formula calculations and assume 80% usability. Given the, the site has 264 spaces spread all over. The building is 76,400 square feet. If you assume an 80% usable floor calculation, as the applicant has in this case, 61,120 may be considered usable. When you then take that out to do the full calculation, you ended up with a 305 space requirement. That's one for every 200 square feet. As you know, the application would be different under the new ordinance because the number of required spaces would be different. However, the parking is permissible in the front yard. The number of spaces would bring it up to the minimum required by the old ordinance, and therefore we don't have a big problem with that. There's a few things to consider, a few other additional items. One is there is a strip of land bank parking in the rear yard behind the building that they've added there, although they don't propose to build that at this time. I support the land banking approach. I believe the reason, I'm sure the applicant could discuss that with you, future potential tenants or expansion of uses inside the building, they probably want to be able to have that additional flexibility. Even in the new ordinance, we kind of talk about, if you're over on the required amount of parking, it's an additional consideration, but here it's such a minor number of spaces relative to the overall lot. We don't have a problem with them land banking those additional spaces. In terms of the impact to the existing site, really what they're going to impact is the landscaping along the main road. There's a sort of a mature hunk of trees there along the road and a berm. And while they would be removing a good chunk of those trees and leveling and changing the berm, what they did do was put in treatment that is in keeping with the Big Beaver design guidelines that the Planning Commission adopted not too long ago, along with the DDA. There's a 3-foot berm in that area and a row of decorative trees, but they also incorporated a sort of a pedestrian plaza there right on the road along with a bench, and they proposed a treatment that would take you right to the front of the building. Also, they included enhanced landscaping in other areas of the site and are enhancing that area on the south east corner of the building. That's sort of a public plaza there, entering in and out of the building. So, although we never want to encourage the removal of mature trees, the treatment that they proposed here is not only permissible, it's actually in our design guidelines, and I think they've done a really good job of incorporating our design recommendations to mitigate that. So one of the things that the Planning Commission was consistently concerned about was the large parking lots, headlights, things like that facing the road, and I think they've done a good job of incorporating elements that we've asked for. They do have an existing 8-foot sidewalk there as required, and it's going to remain. And I know that they're also planning a few minor cosmetic improvements to the outside of the building, in case you were wondering. I'm sure the applicant could discuss that. They did submit some information about that, but mainly it's just painting the building and doing a few minor revisions that wouldn't require Planning Commission approval. So we don't have any objection to the design that it's proposed. I like the 21 spaces being land banked in the rear yard. They've done a good job mitigating potential negative characteristics. We recommend the Planning Commission approve the applicant's request.
Any questions of Mr. Brannigan? Mr. Schultz?
Mr. Brannigan, in reviewing the site plan, I did not see any cross-access easement delineated on the property. Is there one, or is there any proposal to include one? Because normally, under the old ordinance, we insisted upon a cross-access easement to other properties.
I don't know that there is one proposed or existing on the site. Brent, do you know?
They do propose a connection with the property to the north. If you look at the northwest corner, they propose, it's not solid parking along that property line, and there appears to be a cut there, but there's no cross-access specifically called out on the site plan.
Right. Yeah, and the properties that are immediately to the east are all the backs of all the retail there. Yeah.
There are also some grade issues with those properties.
There is a great issue there. In terms of access to the east, to the west, it could impact, well, I don't know. They have existing parking along there. There's existing parking on the other side of the site. And then there's also the E-Title has that rain garden and gazebo area there that kind of sort of limits their ability to do it in the front. And then, of course, there's the Starbucks, which is, their site is crammed. No, I don't think any new cross-access is proposed there.
Can I just get a clarification? There is no registered cross-access easement on the property currently?
I don't believe there is.
Okay.
Any other questions, Mr. Reagan? Mr. Krantz?
In the past, I've heard that we're trying to eliminate as many curb cuts to a business as possible, and now we're adding one. Is this in fitting with the Big Beaver corridor improvements? Or, in other words, I've always heard that we're trying to eliminate curb cuts, and we've added one here. What's the comment on that? I understand it makes for a better traffic flow in the parking lot. I could see that.
We're not necessarily always looking to eliminate curb cuts. That's not necessarily the case. Although, a broad generalization would say that fewer curb cuts is often better. The limitation on curb cuts is, a traffic issue, and typically you're going to get, higher speed traffic through there. I think the number of curb cuts is probably not nearly as big a concern, when we're actually trying to dull the traffic down nowadays and slow it down on Big Beaver, to be honest. So I don't think that it really deeply impacts the Big Beaver design guidelines, and it was reviewed and okayed by the traffic engineering department for the city. Didn't have an issue with the design as proposed, but it is a very good question.
Anyone else? Is the applicant present?
Oh, I'm sorry.
All right, sign in, tell us who you are, and if you wish to add anything to the comments.
My name is Matt Farrell on behalf of Core Partners, principal and owner. I am the exclusive representation of Raymond Group Financial, who is the proposed tenant for the second floor, as well as the exclusive representative of Adelson and Commercial Financial Management, the owner of the property. As proposed, appreciate the comments from all parties. We're excited to bring Raymond Group to Big Beaver Corridor. They're currently located up on Crooks Boulevard or Crooks Road. They've been a long-time Troy occupying tenant. And they're proud of being in the community, and we're very excited about the modifications and rendering changes to this facility, as it was previously occupied for a number of years by the Sandy Corporation at a relatively higher density than the Raymond companies proposed to use it in as their professional accounting practice. And we hope that you'll be as excited about the final product as the applicant is at this point in time.
Thank you. Any questions of the applicant? Mr. Stratt.
I don't know if it's with Zach or with the applicant, but the Big Beaver Corridor study, we tried to create as many trees as possible that create the umbrella. And I noticed that they're taking out all the trees on the boulevard and they're placing them in with plant material, which I think is the opposite approach that we wanted to take with the Big Beaver Corridor study. I don't know if it's Zach or who would be, or maybe the applicant might answer that, but I would prefer to see the trees left or new trees put in that are umbrella-type trees that create canopies. That was the intent of the Big Beaver Corridor study.
We have discussed that at many meetings, that's true.
Yes. Let me see here.
Would you be receptive to doing that?
I'm not opposed to it. These are the recommendations made by Noack and Frost and their landscape engineering group in combination with Kevin Biddison, the architect, working on the renderings and the modifications to the facility. The goal of the tenant, the occupying tenant, who's the one proposed to occupy the premises, is to open up the visual capability of the building and be more present to the street, which they feel is somewhat in accordance of the long-term intent of trying to bring the building closer to Big Beaver. Unfortunately, moving the box at this point in time isn't economically feasible to do so, and we've looked at expanding the facility, bringing the facility closer. At this point, we're fortunate to have a prospect that fits the second floor, and with a significant facade renovations and landscape renovations that we can woo them to that corridor. Their goal would be to keep manageable foliage between Big Beaver and the property, but not visually impairing that would block the facility as much as it does today. A lot of the foliage today is overgrown and not maintained.
Well, you do have a row of trees there that are actually still blocking it. Instead of those trees being there, it would have been nicer if they were in the actual boulevard area or left. I have no problem with the landscaping, with the flowers or whatever their planting material is going to be there, but I still think we need the canopy. I don't think it would interfere the vision of the building at all.
Mr. Stratt, if I could ask for a clarification on the trees in the boulevard, can you define which location, which area? Is it the green space between the sidewalk and the parking lot?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, those are planting areas, and there were trees there originally.
There was a...
They do have a row of replacement trees there, Mr. Stratt, but they're obviously going to be considerably smaller, but they're...
No, those aren't trees.
14 ginkgos.
I didn't read them as trees.
My understanding from, and I'm not an expert in arborist, but my understanding is those are trees, but they're smaller diameter.
Ginkgos. They're ginkgos, so they are trees. They're smaller trees. They're 3.5-inch DBH trees.
They're 6-inch by 6-inch, 30-inch high precast planter with seasonal annual.
No, you're really close there. There's another note you can see that goes in, and it's 8 GB, and it goes to, I wish I had the pointer. Brad, do you have the pointer, and you could show us that? It is there. It maybe is kind of hard to see because it's got a really long leader line that goes to the note. Here, no, here, let me...
Right there.
I know I'm going to need this later in the meeting, so I'm going to just get the pointer.
There's 8 GB down here.
Yeah, and then there's 6 GB
Yeah.
on the other side.
There's 6 GB right there. 8 GB.
Oh, 14 trees.
So they'll have 14 ginkgos along front of the berm. All right.
These? No, I'm talking about these.
Oh, yeah, but these are street trees here. There's 14
No,
trees there.
he's taking off the trees here
Right, but he's replacing them with these. These are all new.
on the other side, but we wanted to canopy the street.
You're talking about the location of them inside
Yes,
the right.
right. We're canopying, and based on the information we got as far as the Big Beaver corridor study, that was the purpose. So he's taking these out.
Yeah. Unfortunately,
Yeah, I don't, if he could leave those in and put the other canopies in there, that'd be fine, or the other planters in there. I don't want to
inside the right of way, are they?
Yeah, they're inside the right of way. He's taking them out. Across here.
So it looks like here, what are they numbering? They're number 31.
Yeah, those are all that are being taken out. That might, yeah. I'm not adding anything. What I'm trying to do is eliminate some of the demolition that you're doing, really, more than anything else. That would be
Did we
the,
come to a consensus on anything?
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Strad is correct. I mean, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 trees. You can see there, the lower, there's 2 rows, a proposed new row, and then proposed existing row on the other side of the sidewalk inside the right-of-way. And that's what he was referring to was, he'd prefer not to see the ones inside the right-of-way removed.
Mr. Schultz?
I have a question for Zach or Brent. Has Road Commission for Oakland County given permission to remove trees within their right-of-way? I don't think this petitioner has the authority to remove those trees.
Mr. Seven?
I don't know the answer to that question, but you are correct. Those trees that we're talking about are within the Oakland County right-of-way. Technically not part of the site plan.
Didn't Downtown Development Authority actually put those in?
Yeah, we didn't, it's a good observation, Mr. Strad, because I didn't catch it during the review, but you wouldn't be eligible to remove those without prior permission, no, because those trees don't belong to the owner.
Right. I think they were put in by DD, but actually they're owned by the county. Ms. Schultz is correct.
I believe you're correct. Can I add something?
Absolutely.
I think that's a great catch, Mr. Stratt. I missed it and Zach missed it. That being said, it technically is not part of the site plan approval. Technically, it's an off-site condition, off-site removal, whatever. It's not on the site, but we will take that under advisement and we'll do some research internally and find out what the status is on these trees. Good catch.
I would say ultimately what you could do is, because they are shown as removed on this site plan, if you were to take a positive action towards the approval overall tonight, you could condition it on, the removal of those being shown as removed, or, taking that off of there. Now, that doesn't mean that the applicant can't then pursue with Oakland County and with the DDA the removal of those trees later on. I just don't want to give the impression to the applicant or to anybody that the Planning Commission would be approving an off-site improvement that we may not be authorized to do. So, maybe just, it would only show changes inside the boundary of the site.
Or perhaps as a design consideration, they could have planning and engineering look at this issue, separate from the approval or action on the site plan.
Yeah, sure.
I believe I could make a comment on behalf of the applicant as well, that the direction provided to the landscape architect and Noack and Frost, the surveying engineering group, was to work with inside the sidewalk elimination or diminishing of the berm that blocks that view almost entirely of the property, as well as work with the foliage between sidewalk and property that is overgrown and not maintained, to right-size that to a more practical type arborist activity. The trees from sidewalk to road in the right-of-way, I don't know was ever discussed between the applicant and the parties involved, so it may have been an oversight on our side as well, but I'll obviously take that under advisement. It's not a condition on our end.
Okay. Any other questions of the applicant? Mr. Krant?
On the same vein of discussion here, the berm, first of all, I'm really pleased that you're going to remove all those pine trees. I live within a half a block of that, and if you're riding your bike, you'll get hit with those needles in your face right now. They
Okay.
go right over the sidewalk. I just want to make a comment that those ginkgo trees that are going to replace the pines, are those going to at all eventually, 20 years from now, come over onto the sidewalk where they're placed? They look like they're right at the edge.
That's a great question. Unfortunately, not being an arborist or understanding the growth patterns of the trees, I'm probably not qualified to answer the question, but if anybody has a better understanding of the ginkgo and can offer any assistance in the comment, I'd appreciate it.
The existing trees are not only a hazard to people walking by or riding on a bike, but they were put in sloppily. They're crooked. I mean, the people put them in on an angle. From the day one, I saw those go in, I thought, boy, that contractor must have been a low bidder. I really like your entrance, that grand open in the center area with the paving, the brick paving.
Thank you.
That's really nice. That opens it up. And you've got a bench noted. It looks like there's only one indicated, but I imagine there's two. They're like a mirrored image on either side of that walkway. I don't know what the DDA, because they said they were going to go along with whatever the DDA recommends for benches. I know that in front of Somerset, they have these oak ones that, I don't know if they're still there, but they deteriorated very rapidly because they're oak wood and they were varnished.
Right.
Do you know what material is suggested for that?
Let me try and answer that with an offering. Have you seen the renderings, the facade rendering adjustments that are being proposed? The architect is being Kevin Biddison. If you're not familiar with some of his work, he's a very, very talented with use of metals and glass and so on and so forth. I don't know that the architect would like to see wood benches. I think he's going to be much more in tune with some sort of a metal design, aluminum design, something that's going to benefit the design of the facade. Would be my guess. But here's just a quick color rendering of the intent. The building today is a stark white concrete structure, and I think with shadowing and a cast of paint on the major box and a limestone wrap on the front entranceway and on the front pillars and columns with hopefully some dramatic uplighting and landscape lighting, it should give a significant reface to that facility.
Nice. One thing, I drove around the property, I noticed in the back the trash shielding is falling apart.
Yeah.
Will that, I'm sure that will be updated too on this project?
I can tell you, I speak on behalf of both applicants. You've got a property owner who's obviously doing everything he can, as most property owners are today, to try and attract a good tenant and make it a palatable project. But you have a tenant who is not making a commitment to the project until such time as they're fully accepting of all the changes. So there's a balancing act there to both parties in working with a worthwhile long-term budget for the opportunity. Yes, this building will look as new as a 30-year-old building could look by the time it's ready for occupancy.
Thank you.
A couple of comments.
Mr. Bennigan.
Just a couple of comments. The ginkgo will get to be about 70 to 100 feet tall, just so you know. That's ultimately that's what they make it. Just doing a little bit of homework on kind of what they look like at maturity and all that. With proper maintenance, they shouldn't impact what Mr. Kraunt was indicating. Also, that's all I need right now. That's
Mr. Schultz.
I'm not an arborist either, but if you want to see some of the most beautiful ginkgos in the state of Michigan, go on the skywalk from Somerset on the south side, and the first row of trees you get to are ginkgos, and they're absolutely spectacular. Are we ready for a motion, or do we have comments?
Mr. Evans has got a comment.
I just also wanted to clarify, I think the ginkgo is a really beautiful tree, and I think it's a great selection, and actually I think it will achieve the effect that Mr. Stratt is talking about for the umbrella. It's an umbrella type of tree.
Mr. Tagle.
Matt, do you have any indication or what this pedestrian area off to the right, the gazebo, is going to look like? Is it just going to be a ground plane of different materials? Is there going to be any kind of a roof structure or vertical element?
Great question, Mr. Tagle. I don't believe there's going to be a roof structure. I think it's more in a brick paver, bench seating area surrounded by landscaping and flowering plants and so on and so forth.
All right, thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, sir. We'll bring it back to the table. Is there a resolution? Mr. Schultz.
Whereas the applicant submitted the preliminary site plan approval application prior to the adoption of the comprehensively rewritten zoning ordinance, therefore the now repealed zoning ordinance provisions shall apply. Therefore, be it resolved that the preliminary site plan approval pursuant to section 03.40.03 of the zoning ordinance as requested for the proposed site improvements for 1500 West Big Beaver located on the north side of Big Beaver and west of Crooks in Section 20 within the O1 zoning district be granted subject to the following conditions. The establishment of a cross-access easement in the northwest corner of the property to the north, and all necessary documentation as required by the city. Number 2, no existing trees shall be removed from within the Big Beaver right-of-way. And number 3, if either of these conditions are not agreed to, this item shall be returned to the Planning Commission.
Second.
Support? Mr. Stratt. Any discussion on the motion?
You said that the property to the north would have an access? Isn't that a retention area?
All I'm asking for is cross-access to the property to the north. I don't care if it's retention or not. There's an existing driveway. I would like it officially designated as a cross-access easement.
And there is a parking area to the north that would connect to.
Okay.
Any discussion? If not, roll call, please, Brent.
Mr. Maxwell?
Yes.
Mr. Schultz?
Yes.
Mr. Stratt?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Ullman?
Yes.
Mr. Edmonds?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
We have site plan approval. Thank you. Item number 6, preliminary site plan review, file number SP 968. The proposed suburban Cadillac Buick north of Maple, west of Crooks, which is 1810 Maple Lawn, Section 29, Zone M1, which is light industrial district. Mr. Flanagan.
Yep, this property was zoned M1 under the old ordinance. It's currently zoned Planned Vehicle Sales District under the new ordinance. It's a little bit confusing because there's several different designers involved with this site plan, and when you look at it, you see that engineering may have been looking at the new ordinance, and thus some of the requirements and stuff list the new ordinance. The landscape architect maybe was looking at the old ordinance. Regardless, if you read my review in detail, you can see I kind of straddled and talked about both. However, this application was received under the old ordinance. The old ordinance prevails. There aren't really any areas where that affects the overall plan, to be honest, for this particular project. But I just wanted to bring it to your attention in case you were confused looking at anything on the actual site plan. It's not something that Brent and I had a lot of heartburn about. This project, you all know it well, and right at the corner there as you're curving around Maple Lawn, and you remember this is the Cadillac dealer that's up there. Large service area, the west part of the building, retail sales floor, the east part of the building. You could kind of characterize this as a addition, but they're actually subtracting before they add, so it's 6 one, half dozen the other. But essentially, the net change is that there's like a 700 square foot of additional ground floor area being added to the site, and a mezzanine and some other enhancements. So the front part of the building, the retail new part of the building, is going to be all new, like a new car dealership, but basically they're reoccupying the exact same footprint they had before with just some minor changes. They're also doing some other site improvements, new site landscaping, striping, some other minor parking and circulation elements. The property is in the planned vehicle sales district, so it's surrounded by planned vehicle sales everywhere except for on its west boundary, which it backs up to the design center, which is now in the IB, Integrated Industrial Business District. Right now, under the old ordinance, it would have been all M1. The site is pretty large. It's 7.24 acres. Excluding the Maple Lawn Drive right-of-way, it's 274,525 square feet. So we're talking about a considerable site here. In terms of the building arrangement, the site location, nothing is really changing there. The existing parking area in the front is remaining the same. Some striped areas that they had before, like these sort of striped islands, are becoming landscaped islands, or making some improvements there. We have no objection to the existing site arrangement and how it's being interpreted. In the required and provided dimensions table in my review, you see I put current ordinance, old ordinance in there, but all the provided dimensions. All the provided dimensions meet minimum ordinance requirements for the location of the site. It's under on height. Its side setbacks and rear front are all obviously well in excess of what's required. The minimum site area for the PV district, however, is 15 acres, but again, this is a previously existing nonconformity in that regard, and it doesn't affect its compliance with the ordinance. So, parking. The site has 721 total parking spaces, which is obviously considerably more than is actually required. Our ordinance did not, nor does it now, require parking spaces for outdoor sales area for car dealerships. We require it for the customers and the service bays and the people coming and going on the site. So it's very characteristic of all the car dealerships in Troy to have way more parking than are actually required by the ordinance, and that's something we've obviously come to accept with these because the outdoor storage area is basically like a parking lot. We count them as parking spaces, but they're designed to showcase their product. So where you might see me usually saying we don't want more parking than that's what is required by the ordinance, that's not the case for a car dealership. So I just wanted to put that in there. In terms of the actual calculations, the old ordinance required 2 spaces for every 1 service bay plus 1 space for every 200 square feet of showroom area. So when you have 36 service bays, 72 service parking spaces are required. And then when you count their amount of showroom space, 43 spaces, it's a total of 115 spaces required. In the new ordinance, it would be slightly less. It would be 107. They've knocked it out with 44 customer spaces, 44 pre-owned vehicle display spaces, 126 new vehicle spaces, 79 service spaces, 106 employee spaces, 322 vehicle storage spaces. So you can see they're blown out of the water in every category there. The only thing that I was slightly uncomfortable with was the calculations for how the sales floor was derived, the sales floor square footage calculation was derived. It doesn't impact the approvability of this project because obviously they have way more parking than they need. Just for our records and that, I would like a more detailed, specific description of where they came up with that square footage calculation because I didn't quite understand it when we looked at the plan, and we would like to be able to have that in there. Basically, it was they have a detail about the square footage of the mezzanine, but not a detail of the square footage of the ground floor of the project. So it's a minor detail, but it's something I would like for the final submittal we would have. In terms of site access and circulation, it's access from 2 existing entrances on Maple Lawn as it currently exists. We have no objection to that approach. They are putting in additional new landscaping that's going to slightly enhance and make more permanent kind of the arrangement they have there. There is a new pedestrian accessible platform around the front of the building. If you've seen any of the new Cadillac dealers in other towns, it looks like this. Very similar to this, so have sort of a raised outdoor platform in front with decorative elements, and then they might have a couple cars out there that are sort of up off grade, and you can walk around them and enter the building that way. They don't have sidewalks on the west side of Maple Lawn, as you'll recall. It's only on the east side, and that's sort of a long-standing thing with the auto mall, but there is no pedestrian sidewalk for them to tie into along Maple Lawn, nor is one required of them to put one there. They do have some sidewalks throughout the site and to get from the adjacent parking area, to the front of the building and that, and we're comfortable with the arrangement they have. In terms of natural resources, they're not impacting any protected natural features. Obviously, they are adding landscaping. They do have the required 10-foot green belt. In terms of trees, they are preserving 4 trees and adding 8 new trees to satisfy the street frontage requirements, so they're bringing the site into compliance with the greenbelt regulations. They are going to add 8 additional trees within existing and proposed landscape islands between areas incorporated within the customer parking area. And the species that are allowed are permitted under the new ordinance, and the proposed material dimensions actually exceed minimum tree DBH. So we didn't have as detailed the tree regulations in the old ordinance, so I looked at the new table just to double check and see on the species, and they're fine, and they're actually over a ½ an inch on DBH on everything that they propose. So they're proposing more mature trees than we require. In terms of the the last requirement that I need to talk about is minimum landscaped area. The site is deficient in terms of minimum landscaped area. It always has been. It's a previously existing nonconformity. Also, that's something that is common to basically all the car dealerships up and down Maple Lawn. The site is deficient, but the plan does not eliminate any existing landscaped area. It doesn't increase the level of nonconformity. It actually slightly reduces the nonconformity by adding a little bit of landscaping, and the building is reoccupying the same footprint and other impervious surface, so they're not impacting that nonconformity, they're not increasing it, so that legally existing nonconformity can remain. I believe that the project really does meet or exceed minimum ordinance requirements top to bottom, so we recommend the Planning Commission approves the preliminary plan as requested.
Any questions of Mr. Brannigan? If not, is the applicant present?
Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Stanley Tkach of Studio Design, representing Suburban Collections this evening. I agree with all comments that have been stated. In doing so, that we've tried to be well within the intent of the program without any detrimental changes, since we are sitting on top of the existing foundation, except for the front 6 foot 5 and 5 inches, and raising it to a 2-story building for visuality from Maple Lawn. But I agree with everything else that's been
Any
presented.
questions of the applicant? Thank you. I'll bring it back to the board. Any discussion? Anyone who would like to move a resolution?
I'll move the resolution.
Mr. Maxwell.
Whereas the applicant submitted the preliminary site plan approval application prior to adoption of the comprehensively rewritten zoning ordinance, therefore the now repealed zoning ordinance provision shall apply. Therefore, be it resolved, the preliminary site plan approval pursuant to section 03.40.03 of the zoning ordinance as requested for the proposed site improvements for suburban Cadillac Buick located north of Maple, west of Crooks at 1810 Maple Lawn in section 29 within the M1 zoning district be granted, subject to a detailed square footage calculation provided to the planning consultant.
Second.
Support by Mr. Schultz. Any discussion on the resolution? If not, Mr. Stevenant, roll call, please.
Mr. Schultz?
Yes.
Mr. Stratt?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Ullman?
Yes.
Mr. Edmonds?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Maxwell?
Yes.
We have site plan approval. Congratulations.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Stratt?
I'd like to make a comment. I really appreciate the 8 trees that they put on right adjacent to Maple Lawn, which enhances, again, the development of that whole street, which I think is excellent. I'd like to commend you on that.
Next item on the agenda is a special use request. This is a public hearing and preliminary site plan review of a proposed Maple Plaza renovations. A McDonald's restaurant with a drive-through facility on the northwest corner of Maple and Livernois, specifically 72 West Maple Road, Section 28, it's zone B2 Community Business District. Mr. Brannigan.
Yes, this site, I'm sure you're all very familiar with, is currently the only use on the property is the Indian restaurant that's in the southeast corner of that existing building. The site is almost entirely just asphalt parking lot with the building sort of plunked well in the back over there. It is a multi-tenant building. The application would be to create a revised footprint multi-tenant building by adding substantial renovation to that existing building and then utilizing some of that additional parking area south of the building along Maple Road to put in a McDonald's restaurant. It includes considerable improvements to the site. We're talking lots of new landscaping, quite a bit of improvement there, a whole new building, and like I said, practically a complete tear-up of the existing building there. It also includes revised access along Maple Road and a lot of other things I'll highlight to you really quickly. The site is surrounded by a few different zoning districts. It's B2, or well, again, this ordinance, this is approved under the old ordinance. This project was entirely received and reviewed under the old ordinance, so you'll see me referring to zoning districts and things from the old ordinance. It's R2, two-family residential district immediately to the north, along the north property line. It's B2 to the west, you have Maple Road to the south, and then you've got 2 B3 parcels, you know, the liquor shop, and then that small building that was vacant until just recently. I think a business just moved into 1631 Livernois, if I'm not mistaken, but I don't know what it is. But they're retail locations. In terms of the building location and site arrangement, the main building location wouldn't be changing. However, you can see on the site plan that there's, you know, changes in the way that the people would interact with the building. It's more L-shaped now. There's a parking area. It would be oriented kind of towards Livernois, would be sort of the multi-tenant part. And then you can see the McDonald's restaurant south of it, which would address Maple Road. This underutilized area on the south there right now, I just was out there today. I mean, it is just shoulder-to-shoulder asphalt paving right now. So there's definitely plenty of space out there. They do have a one access point coming off of Maple Road now in this proposed plan. It's 3 lanes wide, so it'd have a dedicated right, a dedicated left, and then a dedicated in coming from both directions. So it would be an improvement. Right now there's 2 driveways that, in accordance with what we had talked about before. This is a location where actually we really would support limitation, choking it down to 1 driveway like this, because we have a lot of driveways in a really short amount of time here, and from a just an access management point, and this is definitely an improvement, and our engineering department looked at it and liked it. we definitely support the new configuration. I think that it's probably, about the best you could do with arranging such a difficult site to put something like this on it. There are a few site constraints we'll talk about in a minute in terms of parking and a couple other elements of the site, but overall I think we're satisfied with the building location and site arrangement. Under the new ordinance, this building would be up near the street more. Right now it's 75 feet back. It's right at its minimum setback, which is 75 feet under the old ordinance, so they're complying with the old ordinance there, and you can see they've got plenty of circulation room in front. But then again, it's also, this is a relatively small footprint McDonald's, and they've, kind of jammed as much, I think, as they could into a small footprint. In terms of the setback table, there I have a couple areas where we weren't provided with information, like for instance, the, McDonald's, separation from Livernois is not applicable. In this case, it was kind of difficult to review this, but I tried to put a detailed 3-tier table in there. It does meet all the minimum setback requirements around the site, though. There is a couple of minor informational elements I'd like them to fill in there, but nothing that affects compliance with the ordinance. When scaled, it's clear that everything meets. The dimensioned height of the Troy Maple Plaza building wasn't provided either, although it's clearly within ordinance requirements. It's just not dimensioned on the plan. We had discussed site access and circulation. In terms of pedestrian circulation, there's going to be a considerable improvement to the site with a plan like this, even though they're adding more to it. Right now, there's no way to get from Maple to the building. There's no way to get from Livernois to the building without just running across an asphalt parking lot. This is something that we stress with the applicant, and I think they've done, considering the intensity and traffic of the site, I think they've done a satisfactory job of doing that. There's a sidewalk along Maple, and then they do have access that goes from their landscape island straight to the front of the building. They do have good access for pedestrians on the two sides of the building where people would interact with it most clearly. And then they do have, you can see there's a crosswalk going across to their parking area that's east of the building, and then all along the front of that there's a sidewalk that goes right up the side of that east parking area and then connects with the Troy Maple Plaza. So you'd be able to walk over to the McDonald's as safely as possible on a site like this. If you were parked at Troy Maple Plaza. So if you were one of the workers in the office spaces there, or if you parked in their lot and went into one of the retail locations and decided to walk over to McDonald's and get something to eat, you would be able to do that. They've done a pretty good job of that. In addition, they've added some sidewalk from the main building going out toward Livernois. So there are some considerable improvements in terms of pedestrian circulation. Parking is a little bit complicated on this site. We're talking about basically every use imaginable is proposed for this. They are going to they would require a modification to the parking requirements in order to allow the project to proceed as planned. I'm going to demonstrate to you the information they gave us and what we think about the parking situation on the site. The site plan drawing actually shows 110 spaces. The narrative on sheet CS item 9 says that there's 108, but when you count them up, I believe there's 110. I think just two might have been, the two up near the building near McDonald's or something may not have been included, but regardless, let's say that there's 110 parking spaces. If you bear with me a sec, I want to run through the required parking because I think it's important to do so. The existing restaurant has 111 seats. One space for every 2 seats is 56 spaces plus one for every 10 seats. You end up with a 67 space requirement for the existing Indian restaurant. McDonald's, using the same, is going to require 36 seats for the sit-down portion of the restaurant. So you've got 67 and 36 for the restaurants. The total office space is requires 9 spaces given its square footage. The proposed beauty salon square footage would require 12 spaces. That's sort of an unusual one. 3 spaces for each of the first 2 chairs and 1 for each 1.5 spaces for each one chair. It's crazy, but anyway, 12 spaces. And then the retail spaces, you have 1 space for every 200 square feet of gross retail. It requires 30 spaces. The McDonald's drive-through stacking space requires 9. So you have 154 plus 9 stacking. They propose 110 plus 16 stacking. So they're over on stacking. And as you can see, it's one of these McDonald's that has, like the one on Rochester and Big Beaver, where it's got 2 ordering kiosks, and then you go through 1 lane to actually pick up the food. The applicant did do some homework on the use of the site as it exists now, the existing restaurant, and then has some idea about what the other uses need, and then talks about shared parking and peak hours. The site plan is deficient, let's see, an overall number of 44 spaces required by the ordinance. They provided parking counts for the existing restaurant and an alternate parking calculation for the remaining site on sheet CS item 10. So you see it in there, they show the required parking, and then they have alternate parking, and basically that's sort of their argument for parking spaces. If you have any additional questions, we can talk to the applicant about it. But it states that when the peak occupancy for the restaurant hits in the early evening and on weekends, the office and salon uses are closed. So, you know, those kind of balance each other out. It also states that the restaurant in real observations really only requires about 15 spaces at lunch, which is far less than the 67, which is actually sized for that evening rush when they actually do get up to 60 cars in their observations. The dine-in traffic for McDonald's also decreases in the evening when the existing restaurant is busy. We don't have any detailed, you know, information in that regard. That's just in their argument. We do recognize that the 42 spaces required for the office and salon uses, though, would be obviously unoccupied because they would be closed when the restaurant is busiest after 5 o'clock. And then showing that the 15 spaces are all that's required for the restaurant at lunch on a weekday and up to 65 on a Saturday, given those off-peak times, usually leaving at least 42 spaces unoccupied right now. Assuming that the retail McDonald's were at maximum capacity and all were using their parking, there is still sufficient evidence here that the offset hours of the office salon uses in the sit-down restaurant, combined with the clear excess of parking required for the restaurant, are sufficient to justify the modification, in my opinion. Given that information, I would recommend that you approve the applicant's request for the parking modification. There's a few informational elements that we may need there, as noted in my report, but I believe that you're probably going to be okay on parking. If you go out there now, you'll see that the restaurant really does. I went and observed it just before I came here, actually, and, you know, there was about 18 cars, you know, 20 cars parked in the lot there. And this was, you know, the dinner time hour. They do have a landscape plan that's included in there. It's a 10,675 square feet of required landscaping is necessary for a site of this size. It includes 10,842 eligible square feet of landscape area, so it exceeds the minimum requirements. It also includes the required 10-foot wide green belts on Maple and Livernois, and the trees at a rate of 1 every 30 feet. They do have them in both. On the Maple Road side, the trees are not right up on the road, as we had discussed. They put them in a few other areas. You can see kind of, you know, jammed in the corner and a few other spots there, but that is in keeping with allowable practices, and we've allowed them to do that. We've allowed them to put street trees between the building and the street before, and so that's, we had discussed that, and it was allowed. On Livernois Road, they do have the trees right along up there, and they're fine. There is a collection of about 28 new trees in total, a lot of new ground cover shrubs, landscape islands. You know, it's extensive. Obviously, right now it's paved. There's no landscaping at all. There is a small issue with lighting. They're not required to show lighting for a preliminary plan in the old ordinance, but they did. And the photometrics show that they have a clear heavy-duty excess of light spilling over the property boundaries. We don't allow that. So although it's not required for preliminary, we would recommend that a condition be placed on any approval or anything you would give tonight that they limit the lighting within City of Troy allowable limits using cutoff fixtures and that. We don't allow any encroachment onto adjacent properties, and they've got as many as like 11-foot candles going on the site, the next site over to the west. So there would have to be an elimination of the cross-boundary encroachment. In terms of the last thing, the special use, everything on the site is permitted by right except for the drive-through itself. So the restaurant, all the other uses in the multi-tenant building are all permitted by right. The drive-through addition to the McDonald's restaurant is what requires the special use permit. There are specific use standards for drive-up windows and service facilities accessory to restaurants under the old ordinance, and they are as follows. Ingress and egress has to be provided so as not to conflict with adjacent uses or adversely affect traffic flow on adjacent thoroughfares. I believe that the site access is actually better because even though you're going to have that traffic, they've limited it down to this much more manageable one driveway, like I said, with a dedicated right, dedicated left, and dedicated in. Our traffic engineering department looked at it, felt comfortable with the arrangement that's been proposed. Minimum site area of an acre is required. With 150 feet on a thoroughfare, they have that. The backup or waiting space have to be provided, manner physically separated from off-street parking areas and drives. I believe it does that. They've got required stacking and satisfied. And then the last thing, which this is sort of an unusual one, I don't think this made it into the new ordinance, is that the consumption of food within vehicles parked on the premises has to be prohibited. So I would recommend they put a note on there whether or not anybody actually polices people from eating McDonald's food in their cars. I know I've done that 5,000 times. You know, you go through the drive-thru and you just pull your car over and eat it. Well, in Troy, under the old ordinance, that was strictly forbidden. So You might have to add a note to the site plan that says that, consumption of food within vehicles parked on the premises is prohibited. Whether or not Paul would have people out there for zoning compliance looking at that, I doubt it. And I don't believe that's in the new ordinance, if I'm not mistaken. Now, the general standards approval under the old ordinance for special use, as you recall, there's only two things. One is the land use or activity being proposed has to be location, size, and character, so as to be compatible with the orderly development and use of adjacent land and/or districts. And the second one is that the land use or activity under consideration has to be within the capacity limitations of existing or proposed public services and facilities which serve its location. This is a restaurant use with a drive-through. It's fairly common for intense commercial areas throughout the community. The most intense use of the site is away from the residential, and it's separated by a large multi-tenant building. This site is very heavily landscaped. It has been reviewed by our DPW, our traffic engineering department, our fire safety officials have looked at it. They believe that it complies with the ordinance requirements. They believe that it's compatible and doesn't exceed public service requirements. I believe that the intensity of the site is, it's actually an improvement over what it is now. I don't believe it's overly aggressive for a site of this size on Maple Road at a major intersection like this. So we believe that it does meet the special use standards for the city of Troy. Submittal requirements have been met. So consequently, we recommend that you approve the required parking deviation and preliminary site plan and recommend to City Council that the applicant's request for the special use actually be approved, conditioned on the lighting issue that I mentioned, and that the informational administrative elements noted in the letter are addressed in a revised submittal.
Any questions, Mr. Brannigan? Mr. Maxwell?
Zach, that's going to be a pretty difficult left turn out of the property, especially during rush hour, considering its proximity to the intersection. Do you think that, considering rush hour traffic, that the difficult left-hand turn there during those hours may back up traffic on the site and cause a problem in there?
I don't know. I can't comment on the specifics of it, Mr. Maxwell. I know that the traffic engineering department looked at it and felt satisfied that the improvements proposed on the site were going to be an enhancement over what's there now. Right now, they do have the 2 curb cuts. That could potentially be the case. More advanced engineering will take place between now and final site plan. So if they discover that there would be issues at that point, they might bring it up. But that's all I'm able to say is that the engineering department felt comfortable with the arrangement as proposed.
Okay, well, just from seeing other locations around the city, it's pretty obvious here that at 5 o'clock, if you have 10, 12 cars backed up at Maple, which you certainly will have more than that, then people trying to egress into a line of cars, and potentially you got a serious problem there, and I think we need a remedy to that.
Mr. Tagle?
Zach, do you have any concern with the sidewalk that is west of the easterly parking lot, the 5-foot wide sidewalk, that cars will overhang that sidewalk and really force people to walk in the drive lanes?
Let me see here. My computer's loading really slowly. Let me get it up on my screen. I believe those parking spaces are full City of Troy parking spaces, so they don't, we have approved short parking spaces with the overhang designed into them. You could be right that potentially cars could do that. They wouldn't necessarily have to because the parking spaces are of sufficient size to do that. If they are, we could potentially ask for an additional 2 feet of width there for the walkway to mitigate in case that would actually happen. Typically, we only require that if the parking spaces are short, but it's a good observation. You could conceivably have that issue there.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Schultz?
If they're, in fact, 19-foot parking spaces, wouldn't it just be easier to ask for bumpers in the parking spaces so the cars can't overhang the sidewalk?
You could do that. Let me confirm that really quick before we do anything. You have a, yes, 18.5 and a 19-foot parking space, 24-foot maneuvering, and then another 19-foot space. Parking bumpers are okay. Parking bumpers is, the problem with parking bumpers is maintenance. We have parking bumpers around town that get cracked and broken up and stuff. But in this case, you could certainly add those there. There would be no reason not to, sure.
I think it would be worthwhile to avoid a potential pedestrian problem.
Sure, I have no problem with that. Those are all good suggestions. We could discuss with the applicant. I think those would probably be That'd be right. You're absolutely right. If you had a 2-foot overhang there, you'd only be left with 3 feet. And given that we're kind of counting on that for access to some of the parking and to the building, I think that's a reasonable thing to talk about.
Anyone else? Mr. Stratt?
Yeah, you can increase the width of that sidewalk to 7 feet. That'd be the simple solution, so that you're covered on that.
Yeah, and if you did that, you could make the parking spaces shallower, and then
Right.
it'd be okay.
So that you've got that.
Yeah.
Still have the 5-foot clear walkway,
Yeah, it's,
but having a bumpers are not as, the maintenance problem on those. But that's something the applicant can answer.
Well, let's find out. Is the applicant present? Why don't you come up, please?
Good evening. John DeBruni with SDA Architects. Do we want to address that parking and sidewalk issue right now, or do we want to?
No, go ahead. Why don't you do that?
Okay. We were just discussing that, and we would be more than happy to increase that to 7 feet. It makes the most sense in the world. They would rather not see the parking bumpers, the bumper blocks. They just get tore up. We do have other spaces on the site that have similar situation. The east parking lot, which doesn't show up on that view, but the parking lot to the east of the Troy Maple Plaza also have parking spaces that face south at a 5-foot sidewalk there. We can increase that to 7 feet as well, which will solve all of the issues throughout the site on the same topic. Would we decrease the space then to 17 so that the curb?
yes.
Then we're good with that.
Might consider the south parking as well. Increase the amount of landscaping.
In general, we appreciate your effort on this. This is a pretty complex site, trying to get all the pieces to fit in there. And everything the planning consultant has discussed, we agree with. We're excited to clean up a tired site and bring a little more energy back to that intersection. And as you know, it's a 2-part project with the McDonald's and the Troy Maple Plaza projects going simultaneously on the site. The site currently has 0 landscaping on it. We've brought it up to ordinance standards with over the 10% minimum. We've introduced the pedestrian traffic through the site. In general, in terms of the driveways, we can talk about that as well, but we've decreased 2 driveways off of Maple Road into 1, and there's actually 2 driveways onto Livernois as well, which we've decreased down to 1 as well. So I think we've, addressed that issue as best as we can while maintaining driveways onto each of those roads. So I guess we can discuss whatever else you guys would like to discuss specifically.
Does anybody have any questions of the applicant? Mr. Savanant?
Not a question, just a comment. I just want to make clear for the record that 3 people submitted opposition emails to this project. And I just wanted to, if they're watching at home or they're in the audience, I wanted to clear that these were provided to the planning commission.
And we have received them and read them. If not, thank you.
I want to introduce myself. My name is Frank Martin, an architect with Dorch and Martin Associates for McDonald's. So if there are any any questions regarding the McDonald's. I think one of the items that we talked about that was brought up by the planner was the lighting levels that we will take care of in terms of getting that prior to when you require it. And the other question would be, of course, I think what John had mentioned about extending that walk the extra 2 feet is an obvious solution to that, because bumper blocks will disappear with snow plowing, and so there's no problem with that.
Thank you.
Right.
Mr. Ullman?
Mr. Maxwell brought this up, and I, like him, am concerned about left turns, trying to get through that left turn lane. Because you do have the 2 driveways, would we be better served, at least for parts of the day, maybe at specific times, to prohibit left turns out of there and let the traffic that has to go either east or north to come out of the drive, if you have 2 driveways onto Livernois?
Again, I am not a traffic engineer, and I think your engineer looked at it. I don't know how effective signs with hours, left turn, right turn hour, or what experience the city has had with that. I don't know if any of the McDonald's people who might be here have any comments. I do know that from the McDonald's end, in terms of traffic generating in the evenings, rush hour, probably much less than in the lunchtime or breakfast, as you can imagine. I think it was brought out just by virtue of the calculations for parking. But I can understand the concern. I don't know what can you show the overall plan? Do you have an overall plan?
Be the cover sheet.
The cover sheet, possibly?
One more. 2 more. There you go.
Okay. I don't know the distance, of course, from our driveway going into the site to the intersection, but you can obviously see that the right turn lane across the way, and I can also understand the concern one might have knowing about Maple and knowing about traffic at that time. So I don't know if the planning department would like to look into it a little bit more with the traffic engineer or consultant has something here.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm guessing that given that they're limiting it down to one access site, I can't speak for Mr. Hootery in our traffic engineering department, but something like a right turn in, right turn out, is probably not feasible given that it's their only access point on Maple Road. So that's why you wouldn't see that here. If they had 2 points of access, I'm sure that would have been the go-to. I think in these sites, we've seen these properties that are somewhat near these busy intersections. I mean, it's somewhat at the owner's peril. I mean, they know that might be a condition they have to contend with. I'm not condoning it or blessing it. It's just that, I don't know. And I don't know about signage or anything like that, but we can definitely take, Mr. Ullman, we can take your concerns and bring them up with Mr. Hootery when he looks at it again and bring up that recommendation and see what he has to think about it. We're happy to convey those.
Well, I have one other comment, if I could. One of the interesting things about this particular site is that there are 2 access points to the site, one off of Maple and one off of Livernois. And typically, I might say this is kind of a neighborhood community site where people will generate, people will probably understand going to the McDonald's, using the facilities, and I know for myself that if I were faced with the fact of the left-hand turn out of the site, going eastbound, I would find my way going to Livernois, making a right-hand turn, and then getting in a left-hand turn lane and find my way out. It's kind of an interesting situation working on projects in Southfield. We have kind of a similar thing along Southfield Road, a lot of curb cuts, and there are some connections between some parking lots, and people have, because it's not kind of a highway store where people come once in their life and figure out how can I get out of here. So I think we have kind of a fail-safe in terms of those other access, and that can go in both directions depending on which way traffic is going, if it's morning or if it's evening. So I think that's a consolation to this, and I think it's good because one of the things that's been created on this site is a more organized traffic flow compared to what's there now, and I don't believe it would be people cutting diagonal through this massive lot anymore. We do have some paths that are going on and some, I think, some direction. So I would just like to throw that out for comment.
The one other enhancement that the site plan has over the existing condition is 360-degree access around the Troy Maple Plaza building. So you have, you know, another opportunity for out there if you're going around, you're parking for the restaurant, you can loop around now the west side of the building because they're taking a big hunk of that building off. It is paved and there's service area and dumpsters and stuff on the north side of the building facing the residential now, but now you'd actually be able to drive through there and shoot right out there. They're now one point of access at the northeast corner of the site, so.
Mr. Schultz? Kevin? Mr. Edmonds?
So there are cross-access easements for this site?
There will be.
Will be, thank you.
Yeah, there will.
If I could, I agree with Mr. Martin. My first thought, I can understand your concern. I do want to reiterate that our transportation engineer, our traffic engineer, does a very thorough job of reviewing these applications, and he did not indicate that there was an issue with the left turn lane. But I do agree with Mr. Martin. If it was me, knowing what I know about the site, and I wanted to go eastbound, I would get my hamburger and I'd go up to Livernois and I'd negotiate it that way. And I think that that's one of the benefits of these two buildings, you know, having the cross access is this ability to get where you want, maneuvering onto the site. And I would also echo what John said regarding, if you look now at the curb cuts, you can imagine how, you know, granted this is not real busy, obviously, but you can imagine the potential conflicts when you've got a car wanting to turn this way and another car wanting to turn this way. They're reducing, going from 2 to 1, and doing the same up here, going from 2 to 1. So the reduction of the number of curb cuts it's going from 4 to 2, I think, dramatically improves the site.
And actually, also, if I could add, you know, there is going to be customer traffic for the McDonald's that comes off of Livernois, and I think that we were trying to think about that too, and I think they did a good job of that. You come in off Livernois, you go right up to the front of Troy Maple Plaza and make a left, and then that spine goes all the way directly south, right through the McDonald's parking area. You make a quick left, and you can go right into the drive-through lane. So, you know, they have these sort of north-south corridors there, and they've built everything around it. I think that it will work.
Thank you.
Can I just bring up one other point, Mr. Chairman? This McDonald's is a relocated McDonald's from the one that's on Livernois, just south of Maple. There's a McDonald's restaurant that's a part of that large area that's there. That McDonald's is essentially moving to this location, so we're not going to have two McDonald's within an eighth of a mile of one another. That's it. Thank you.
This is an opportunity for anyone attending tonight for public comment on this request for preliminary site plan approval and special use. Does anyone wish to address us?
Yes, name's Lou Marcucci. I live on Ed 93, which is obviously close. My concern is relative to the noise that these drive-ins generate. I've walked down in Clausen, and I can hear the babble from the drive-in mechanism halfway down the street. So my concern is about noise, especially since these drive-ins operate well past midnight.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else wish to address us? I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the board then. Any discussion?
I've got it.
If not, we'll entertain the resolution. Mr. Krent?
Well, before I do that, I just had a point of discussion with the resident here. Is there, and I guess my question would be to the architect, is there any way, or the owner of McDonald's, is there any way to direct the speakers from those, I guess there's going to be two order-taking stands in the parking lot. Is there any way to direct the speakers so that it doesn't go in the direction of the residents?
If you happen to look at the site plan where the two ordering positions are, you will note that they're diagonal. They're 45-degree angle, kind of northwest, let's so to say, and the speaker positions are actually facing the northeast. And facing the northeast, we actually have almost a two-story building that's blocking sound from speakers should it project. We're a long way from residential. We do have a large building that is between the residential and the speakers, and speaker volume is also adjustable. These new ordering devices not only have that capability, the sounds compared to what they were 5 or 6 years ago are much different. They also have a video display on them so that we're not always depending on what we hear, but we see things, and so we don't have to communicate as much verbally. So we think that we have a pretty good control over maintaining lower volumes, and in this case, we do have also a buffer, and we couldn't be any further away from the residential than we kind of are on this site. So,
thank you very much.
Sure.
What's the board's pleasure? Mr. Tagle.
Whereas the applicant submitted the preliminary site plan approval application prior to the adoption of the comprehensively rewritten zoning ordinance, therefore, the now repealed zoning ordinance provision shall apply. Resolved, the Planning Commission hereby approves a reduction in the number of required parking spaces for the proposed Maple Plaza renovations, including a McDonald's restaurant, with a drive-through facility to 110 when a total of 154 spaces are required on the site, based on off-street parking space requirements as per Article XL. This 44-space reduction is justified through a parking analysis in a report prepared by Carlisle Wortman Associates Incorporated. Be it further resolved that special use approval and preliminary site plan approval for the proposed Maple Road renovations, including a McDonald's restaurant with drive-through facilities located at the northwest corner of Maple and Livernois, Section 28, within the B2 zoning district, be granted subject to the following. All parking lot lighting shall be shielded to prevent spillage onto adjacent property owners. A note should be applied to the drawings indicating that eating in the vehicles will be prohibited. All parking stalls perpendicular to sidewalks shall be reduced to a depth of 17 feet to increase the sidewalk width to 7 feet, and the landscape area adjacent to the south right-of-way shall be increased by 2 feet, and the parking stalls reduced by 17 feet.
Second.
Support by Mr. Schultz. Any further discussion? Mr. Savinin?
Mr. Schultz?
Yes.
Mr. Stratt?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Ullman?
Yes.
Mr. Edmonds?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Maxwell?
Yes.
Passes. I want to tell you that's going to be an improvement to that site. Well done. Next item is a study item, which is a potential rezoning and development project. The east side of Stevenson, north of 14 Mile Road, specifically 466 Stevenson, Section 35, currently zoned RC Research Center District. Mr. Brannigan.
I can do the
Present
next two.
Mr. Savinin.
I will do the next two with,
All right.
with assistance from Mr. Brannigan.
That's fine.
And Zach, feel free to participate at any time. We received a request from Ted Wilson. The request was provided to you. Basically, seeking some time in front of the Planning Commission to discuss a potential rezoning in the city of Troy. It's located, the address is 466 Stevenson. It's located on the east side of Stevenson, just a little bit north of 14 Mile, Section 35. It's presently zoned RC Research Center District, excuse me, and you can see the zoning there on the screen. The property is located right there, where my pointer is. It's the purplish RC zoned area. Their intention is to develop a hotel on the site, and hotels are not permitted uses in the RC district. However, they are permitted, I believe, by special use in the OM district. As I indicated, the property abuts OM to the north. There's a significant area of property that's currently zoned OM. And they're interested in getting some feedback as to the Planning Commission's take on a potential rezoning. I would note that the master plan classifies the area as 21st century industrial, and at this time we're just looking for some feedback in terms of what the Planning Commission thinks of the potential rezoning.
I have a question for you, if I may. Looking at the map, it looks like it's zoned urban residential.
I got two things.
That's a typo.
Oh, all right. Well, that makes a difference in my question.
It does. It does.
Okay.
I noticed the typo after I sent the packet out.
Mr. Schultz?
That was going to be my first feedback, was that was the most confusing map we've ever gotten in the 9 years I've been on the Planning Commission.
Mr. Radigan?
Yeah, the internal city GIS is not up to what the public GIS with the new zoning ordinance is yet, and you can see, we also found there's some few errors in the labeling and that kind of thing. I also wanted to note, Brent, I believe it's actually Master Plan Smart Zone, not 21st Century Industrial. I believe the swath between Stevenson and the freeway, I can go get a map and double check, but I believe that it's the Smart Zone.
Okay.
Not that it's a huge difference, but I think that it is. But
it would help me, I think, maybe the rest of the commission too, if you explain the differences between those two zoning concepts.
If you give me 1 minute, I can get a...
Yeah, Zach, it's locked. Let me go grab it.
Okay, you go grab it. I can explain the differences between the two without the map, but we should confirm just in case I'm wrong. I just, for some reason it sticks in my head that it's Smart Zone between Stevenson and the freeway, and we don't have it on the map. So the 21st Century Industrial District is ultimately what we use to create the Industrial Business District. 21st Century Industrial in the master plan is not so high-tech as it sounds. It basically just means that in the 21st century in Troy, we're not going to have that heavy manufacturing industrial base anymore, and we should think about industrial being a much more open land use category in the future. That's why it's 21st century industrial in the master plan. It was sort of opening the door on things like fencing schools and dog daycares and the Elks Club moving into the industrial district, sort of a industrial district 2.0. What it really does is kind of say, industrial uses have to fit in somewhere, but why do they have to be isolated in their own district? Let's open up all the vacant properties in the industrial district to let them fill in with non-industrial uses so long as they're relatively compatible. And that's kind of the idea there, is this mixing pot of intense uses. If you're going to go in the M1 and now the IB district, you're going to have to understand that, some pretty intense uses can be located in and around you. But then again, we permitted everything by right in that district. The new zoning ordinance, the industrial business district in the new zoning ordinance is based on that 21st century industrial concept. So that's that. The smart zone is more like a conventional research center type district. It's much more limited in terms of the number of uses that it recommends being approved, and it is directly in response to the Big Beaver Corridor study, which called for this smart zone category, particularly for the area up near Big Beaver. Within the DDA, it sort of connects down here. That's the difference between the two. Yeah.
Damn, I think.
Specifically it says there's a special focus on high technology uses that complement one another, potential high density housing in proximity of 21st century knowledge economy employers, and that's because you have high density residential right nearby all the smart zone areas. And then a regionally prominent location for technologically advanced companies. We've got a lot of things there like Automation Alley and other things that are allowable there. It's a unique area dominated by high-tech uses at the cutting edge of innovation. You remember that the Big Beaver Corridor study called it the paragon of innovation for Southeast Michigan. So, but industrial research development and office uses. So that's the difference between those two master plan categories. I can pull up the map here.
So let me ask another question before I turn the rest of the commission loose on you. The parcel, is that presently zoned office?
It's zoned office mixed use. In the
okay, and that's right on the border between this other zoning.
It's the Robbins building.
Yeah, it's a Robbins building. It's a derelict old piece of building that's occupied and weed growing.
The reason that the zoning pattern is like this is because it's based on existing zoning patterns.
All right.
Yeah, we didn't rezone them.
Mr. Schultz.
Based on what you've just read, I would think that a hotel would fit perfectly in that location.
Mr. Strand?
Yeah, I concur. That's my comment. I was going to say anything to improve that whole area there. That existing structure there is really dilapidated.
I agree with you.
I mean, I'd be very supportive of it.
Mr. Stebbins?
I don't want to get into too much detail about the potential hotel, because we're not talking about a site plan this evening. We've got nothing in front of us. The person who is interested in developing a hotel on the site is interested in this for its location, its visibility to I-75. And they feel that this site is not only complementary to the smart zone area, but also highly visible to the hundreds of thousands of vehicles that drive by I-75 daily. So I just wanted to add that.
And it is bounded by OM on two sides already.
Mr. Stratt?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I don't know about the retention area, but is that a part of the development concept, you think? I know that they're here, someone's here.
Preliminary discussions indicate that the detention area is probably appropriately sized to take on basically take on detention from this site.
What I'm asking is there a possibility of that being developed and enhanced, let me put it to you that way, enhanced so that off I-75 and the adjacent buildings can actually view and appreciate that?
Yes.
We have so many of these that are really garbage.
Yes. There was preliminarily, and I'm not putting anybody on the spot or holding anyone, there was discussion of even maybe adding a fountain element, adding some landscaping, turning this into an amenity that can be enjoyed by the guests of the hotel and also visible from I-75. But again, that's site planning. We're not doing that. We're just talking.
Would that fountain be colored?
Mr. Schultz?
I'm confident, the third, maybe the fourth time this piece of property has come before us for potential redevelopment. And this one feels like it might actually work. And I don't know about the rest of my planning commissioners, but I would certainly, at least right now, look favorably on a rezoning request for this property.
All these comments are subject to the approval of the plan itself, right?
That's right.
I think so.
It's a request for rezoning, not for site plan.
Well, Mr. Sabin, you think you've got a sense of what we're thinking?
I'm pretty confident I hear what you're saying. I'm wondering if the applicant is confident that they hear what you're saying.
Mr. Wilson?
I would love to comment for a little bit.
All right, go ahead.
This project, I think Mr. Schultz and Mr. Stratt, and I can't remember, Mr. Hudson, if you were on the commission at the time, but in 2008, we brought the same hotel operator to the Planning Commission, and we were going to try to do it just north of what is the 750 Stevenson building. This is Holiday Inn Express. I mean, there's no big secret about what it is, and we've disclosed it to Brent in our preliminary discussions, and it'll be a 4-story hotel. We had problems in 2008 because we needed to have a parking structure built, and the expense of the parking structure just ended up putting the project out of sight on the thing. And at that time, due to the nature of the high ceilings of the 466 building, the film industry was sniffing around a lot, and the owner wasn't interested in having the building demolished at that time, and the film incentive credits have kind of gone away, and the owner of the building has decided that maybe this is a better use for the property. He also owns the property to the north, which is under serious consideration right now for from our company as well, with a high-tech company that could occupy the whole 50,000 feet that's in the 500 Stevenson building. This whole area can become all of a sudden a whole new tax base for the city of Troy that's had minimal income coming into it in the last few years. We feel that the synergy between the hotel, the 500 Stevenson building, the 350 Stevenson building, the 250 Stevenson building, the 150 Stevenson building could be very dynamic and could become a very prosperous area that could be substantially upgraded. some of the amenities that would be going in with the hotel as a swimming pool indoor. It would also have a large grass area in the back that would overlook the detention pond with the fountain that we're planning on having in the middle of it, and have a sizable area out there that I think would be very attractive from the interstate. One of the problems, of course, that Brent brought up to us in our preliminary discussions was the long I-75. The Highway Commission's been reluctant to take and tear down some of that brush that's along there, but we feel that may be able to be negotiated with the feds or the state as well, to be able to take down that scrub trees that are up there right now. These people were surprised when their site planning person came in, and we only have to have like 11 or 12 trees along Stevenson Highway. I think they're going to do substantially more landscaping than what you're going to want. The setbacks for it's a 3.1 acre site. We actually can get by with probably 2.7, so we're going to have plenty of landscaping in the area, and I think you'll have a very attractive facility here. I'd love to be able to answer any other questions that you have on the site. I do tell you this, Holiday Inn is very anxious to have this thing go forward and have something on I-75. There is an alternate site that's been identified in Madison Heights, and they are going to move forward. But if we get a very favorable opinion from you all tonight, we're prepared very quickly to move forward with a site plan approval, as well as probably some signage variances, the only thing that we're probably going to need at this point, and we'll be in front of the ZBA as quickly as possible as well.
Any questions? Mr. Stratt?
Yeah, Mr. Wilson, I know that Mr. Schultz indicated it's going to be for review or for rezoning. There are several options you may or may, I'm sure you're well aware of, but the conditional rezoning would be something that we're not trying to tell you what to do, and it's not supposed to be from us, but there is a certain comfort level that I think that when you rezone something of this nature, that you want to make sure what you're saying you're going to actually do. And you might consider that, or you might look into that possibility, because that would give us reassurance, as far as I'm concerned, of it being a decent project.
My comment was going to be that if you have a client that's that anxious, you need to move quickly on a rezoning request, whether it is a traditional rezoning request or a conditional rezoning request.
We are planning on
Because
having...
that has to be done before we can approve the site plan.
Yes. Okay. So the rezoning has to be done. We realize that, but we probably will have, before the end of this week, we'll have the paperwork in Brent's office.
It's only Tuesday.
I know. We may have it. I think it's going to be there tomorrow or Thursday at the latest.
Okay. Great. Thank you. The consensus, I believe, is we're in favor of it.
Thank you.
So let me add one more comment. Gentlemen, thank you. Just to add one more comment in concert to it, the property 500 Stevenson, directly to the northeast of the facility, is a 67,000 square foot, 4-story building that was vacated by Beaumont just over 2 years ago when they expanded, relocated up to 750 Stevenson. The property is currently being looked at by a couple of different candidates in the marketplace who are looking at multiple market site selection requirements. One of which is I can speak very openly because we represent the tenant and the property, a company called by the name of Secure 24. It's a growing organization out of Southfield that has grown over the last 6 years from 65 to 70 employees since I started with them, up to about 225, 230 today. I would ask at all a possibility of city and planning commission and other facility or affiliate resources to assist us. We are trying to woo this prospect out of Southfield into the city of Troy to bring that employee base to this market, and working in concert with Ted's client on the hotel development is part of that wooing process. So to the extent you can assist us or help us or give us some vehicles to do that, or just words of encouragement, we'd welcome it. Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 9, potential development project. Potential of Tim Hortons Restaurant, northwest corner of Square Lake and DeQuinder, 43003 DeQuinder, Section 1, currently zoned NN, a neighborhood node district. Who's going to do it? Brent?
I'm going to do this with some assistance from Zach. The address of the property is 43003 DeQuinder. As you indicated, Mr. Chairman, they're interested in developing a Tim Hortons restaurant with a drive-through on the site. The property is presently zoned. It seems weird to say that because it hasn't been that long. It's presently zoned an NN neighborhood node. It's actually node number or letter N, and the property is presently vacant. Some of you may have been on the Planning Commission when we considered this site briefly. Before it was rezoned to NN a week and a half ago, it was zoned, I believe, 01 office. And if you look at the entire, so the parcel you see here on the screen, I believe it was 01. And the parcel to the north, is that right, Mark?
I believe B1.
B1, excuse me, B1, thank you, B1. The property abutting it to the north right here was zoned residential. And we had an applicant come in who submitted a conditional rezoning application with the intent of having a pharmacy on the property, but for whatever reason it died. So this corner has been vacant for quite a long time. It's a little bit less than an acre in size. As I indicated, it's vacant. It abuts, if you look at the zoning, here's the present zoning. Directly to the north of this particular parcel, because the parcel I indicated that in the past was residential, has now zoned NN neighborhood node. So to the north of this small piece here, the property is also zoned NN. It's residential to the west. Across the Quinder in the city of Sterling Heights, it's zoned C1 local convenience business, and as you see to the south, it's also zoned NN neighborhood node. The problem with this location, when you apply the form-based code provisions of the neighborhood node provisions in the ordinance, it permits restaurants and it permits a wide range of uses, however, does not permit drive-through facilities. And I'm going to be off a couple of percentage points, but not much. I believe Tim Hortons, about 85% of their business is through the window. So it's a very important component of the business model for Tim Hortons. So they are interested in discussing what the Planning Commission feels about the concept of a drive-through at this location, because there are potentially a number of steps they're going to have to go through. There's some options to them, but there's a number of steps, because as I indicated, drive-throughs are not permitted in this node at this location.
Mr. Sabaton, I note that if I'm reading from our master plan, neighborhood node N, low-intensity commercial uses should remain, but redevelopment should include an integrated compact residential component, live-work units or a small office. Service-oriented use development in combination with new residential development would provide a unique setting here. It looks like there's an emphasis on residential here, but if you look at that intersection, it's all commercial and service except for this one parcel. This may be our first test as to what we're going to do with the master plan, when it seems to indicate you want some residence units in there and not just service.
That's correct. The applicant did submit a potential site plan sketch, showing how the site could be laid out. And they also, one second.
Okay.
They also provide some color renderings of what the building could potentially look like. We have sat down with the applicant, and we've discussed at length some of the challenges of the zoning of this site and how they want to proceed. There are various there's relief available, like any zoning ordinance, there's relief from standards in the ordinance. However, there's some potential heavy lifting that's involved. but before they went any further, they wanted to kind of take the temperature of the room with the Planning Commission. This is always a very good starting point because you're a pretty sophisticated Planning Commission. You're not afraid to share your opinion, which is, I think, a really good thing. So they're before you this evening to kind of have some dialogue with you.
Mr. Schultz.
Mr. Savinan, correct me if I'm wrong. Under the old zoning ordinance of 2 weeks ago, in B1, the restaurant probably would have been permitted also, but without a drive-through because the parcel is less than 1 acre. Is that correct?
I believe the restaurant would have been permitted, but the drive-through wasn't permitted in B1. I believe they would have to rezone. Geez, it seems so long ago that we had that old ordinance. I believe they would have to rezone to a more intense commercial use to allow the drive-through, but when they rezoned, they would then have to seek a variance because the property was less than 1 acre in size.
Okay, thank you. I forgot that we'd have to go to B2 or B3.
Mr. Ullman.
I have 3 or 4 things. The size of the parcel is small, and as you said, it's going to be shoehorned down to 2/3 of an acre because of the drive-through. I don't have a problem with the Tim Hortons. What I'm concerned about is the drive-through. The noise, this is probably going to be a 24-hour-a-day operation, so the house that is just to the west there is going to be subjected to a lot of noise early in the morning in particularly in the summertime with the windows open. Those are the concerns that I have. Would I like to see a restaurant there? Yes. Would I like to see that used? Yes. But that's not exactly the kind of place, whether or not it evolves into a place where people collect, I couldn't obviously predict. But I'm not at all comfortable with the drive-through aspect of this.
Mr. Stratt.
Now, this certainly is the more traditional way that drive-throughs and a site would be developed, which is not really what we were really after, I think. And a suggestion, and I don't know if you can appreciate what I'm trying to say, but if this were flip-flopped, reversed, the plan flip-flop, and if the actual drive-through were towards the rear and the building was pushed back further towards the west and the actual plaza development outside activity were the closest to the street without having the ring road around, I think that would be something that would be outside of the box and would possibly be appreciated and maybe approved. But the way it is right now, I would not go along with it. The drive-through being right on, the main intersection, Square Lake, it just doesn't make sense to me, even though the parking is in the back. It is not a very attractive elevation to see the drive-through there. So to me, that's you'd have to do something entirely different. I don't know if you understand what I just got through saying, but that would be the thing. More outside terrace area, if I may, or outside seating area at the major intersection right there would enhance what we're trying to create as far as a node. I think that's what our real objective and goal has been on that. I have no problem with the rest of it, and I think the building is certainly attractive, et cetera.
Anyone else? I think a restaurant, a coffee shop at that intersection would be good as far as a master plan is concerned. I think we kind of stretched a little thinking that somebody might put a residential unit in at that corner when you've got a Rite Aid on one corner, a 7-Eleven on the other, and a party store on the other. But that would certainly be a gathering spot, and that's what we had in mind when we established neighborhood nodes. But I think a drive-through would probably not do that. Mr. Schultz?
I think maybe what we were anticipating or hoping for when we were looking at the master plan was that eventually we would see those two parcels assembled into a single parcel that would then have the potential to have a facility like this right on the corner and potentially some kind of residential as a buffer, a high-density residential as a buffer on the north side of the property. But I agree with Mr. Ullman. My concern is the people immediately to the west are going to be blown out of their house with the speaker, because even though we just heard from an earlier petitioner that the new ordering kiosks have a volume adjustment on them, the restaurants only know that there is one, loud. So I have concern about the impact on the neighbors.
Anyone else? Mr. Ullman, I'm sorry, Edmonds.
Well, Tim Hortons is one of my favorite restaurants, and I'm up at the one on Rochester Road, 3 times a week. However, I agree that maybe if this site could be combined with the adjacent site, and then maybe even provide another source of revenue, that's a double. It's a beauty shop and a Tim Hortons, and that might work for the developer. But I think unless you can screen that noise from the neighbors, I think that is a problem.
Would you like to? Yeah, would you please come up and give us your thoughts?
My name is Bert Kassab. I've been before you. In fact, I developed the one on Rochester Road, and as you could see, it turned out to be a good success story for 2 local women who are born and raised in Troy and are the owners and operators of that Tim Hortons. Those of you that go there probably know that. And likewise, the salon is owned by 2 women as well. We've been working on this corner for about 2 years. We've tried different things. It's been sitting vacant for a long time. This particular seller has been trying to sell it for about 5 years, I believe. Hasn't had much luck. When the new ordinance was being enacted, we tried to lay this out as best as possible under the new ordinance. And I thought one of the objectives, and forgive me because we're still learning this ourselves, was to bring the building as close to the corner as possible, and with as little setback as possible. We did that. The only difference would be a 13-foot variance for the drive-through. Mark Kellenberger, who is the planner from Tim Hortons, who's worked with me on the other side as well, tried moving the building around to put the drive-through in a different configuration. It would mean putting the building, if I'm not mistaken, Mark, correct me, closer to the residential that's north of the property, where there's a large subdivision. Our thought was by putting it here, you have the site to the north, which maybe can be an office building, could be potentially a high-density residential. That would hopefully be a buffer between that and the neighborhood to the north. The person to the west, I sympathize with them, but it is next to a commercial parcel. Sooner or later, you are going to have probably a commercial use here. The building we're proposing is only about 2,000 feet, and as you can see, even with that, it's fairly tight. There's not much else you could do with this site on a retail basis that would be economically feasible. The seller coincidentally bought this property from the city, paid a significant sum several years ago. And at the rate that we're trying to make the deal today, he's probably taking a huge loss, to be honest with you. Not that that's a factor, but I just point out to you, economically, there aren't too many options with this tight site to develop it.
I sense that we're really not opposed to Tim Hortons there, but it's just the drive-in component that is the problem.
Yes,
and that might not make it economical for you.
Yeah, as was pointed out by Brent, fortunately or unfortunately, about 80% of our business on a stereotypical basis of a Tim Hortons is drive-through related. So from that standpoint, we don't really, unless they're office buildings or some high-rise type stuff, we don't have any sites in Michigan where we don't operate without the drive-through. So that makes it a little bit difficult. If I could address Commissioner Stratt's question or comment about the orientation of the building. You're referencing more of a perpendicular orientation to Square Lake Road, turning the building maybe 90 degrees, or keeping it in that form and flipping it, almost rotating it, if you will, 180 degrees.
What I'm trying to do is not try to design it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I'm trying to say that our objective and goal was to get the actual plaza area or the seating area at that intersection.
Yeah, okay.
As close as possible, even as a part of the walkway of the pedestrian walk, similar to what we did right here on Crooks Road in Big Beaver. I don't know if you're familiar with...
Absolutely.
Okay, well, that is the concept, that the whole idea is to get walkability and people to see the activity and see the umbrellas and see the activity. That here they're not going to be seen.
And how you solve that problem, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of options there, and to be blatantly honest, what we were trying to do was, don't laugh at me, achieve kind of what you have in the new ordinance with bringing that building as close as possible to that intersection and trying to give the appearance of that building being at a build to line while still preserving the ability to do that traditional drive-through. Following our meetings, we've met before or previously to this with Brent and Zach. We tried the orientation of turning everything internal with the drive-through lane, and because of the tightness of the site and the radiuses needed for that drive-through and the parking, it ended up being kind of a gridlocked site where you would get only enter right-in access only from DeQuinder. You'd be coming in, crossing the drive-through lane immediately, doing the 180-degree turn to get back into the drive-through. So it didn't work from that standpoint. We could definitely look at pushing that building back. That would be something we'd look for direction from you. We didn't do that because we were, again, trying to pull things forward and orient it a little bit more. To your point, Commissioner Stratt, more directly of the patio, maybe there's an opportunity to take that drive-through lane and bring that drive-through radius, instead of squaring that off, creating a plaza area that you would be able to then enter from the sidewalks, if you will, from those. I think there's some options there. We just didn't know what direction to go. The drive-through being the biggest question, front-loading that building or bringing it more internal to the site, those were the types of things that I know you don't want to get into site planning, but was kind of our direction to see, is there a flavor of trying to keep with the ordinance, or just kind of develop it so it fits under some guiding principles?
Well, I'm only saying that we didn't want parking in front, we want the building in front.
Got it, okay. Absolutely.
And we want the people and the people to see all
a lively
right
appearance. Right. Absolutely, yeah. Understood.
I mean, that's my understanding of it. Now, I can't speak for the other commissioners.
Sure.
And the comment was made that people to the west did, they own a piece of property adjacent to commercial. Yes, they do, but they own a piece of property that under the old zoning ordinance and under the new zoning ordinance does not by right permit a drive-through directly next door to their home. So, if in fact they did their due diligence and checked the zoning on that property, and the property, they said, okay, it's less than an acre, it's zone B1, it can't have a drive-through, you might want to have a chat with them.
Sure, and
see how they take it.
Potentially, that's something we would absolutely do. I think it would be smart coming forward with any application to get the neighbors, at least, whether on board or not, but at least make them aware and try to work out some of their issues up front before we come before you. There are some things, too. I have to comment that the site plans given to you only represents a very rough, developable nature. We want to, when we take these things through our real estate committee, we want to make sure they fit. We don't pay attention to as much to the amenities from that standpoint. That's more my job. Once the numbers work, I kind of make it suitable for public consumption, if you will. That being said, the driveways and the drive aisles, those parking spaces that you see on the west side could be eliminated and that driveway reworked to increase buffer areas on that west side, the green belt, a wall option, something. I'm not a big fan of brick walls, but in close proximity, sometimes they make for good neighbors, landscaping one side or the other. Small green belts with berms and evergreens tend to work real well for both sides. Being able to elongate that drive-through, turning the speaker box. There's some things we could do there, but we didn't know which direction to go and didn't want to waste your time or staff's time reviewing a proposal that wasn't suitable.
If I may, to Mr. Schultz's comment, believe me, we had the same challenges on Rochester Road. And if you ask the neighbors there, we went out of our way to make sure we accommodated things and added trees.
And Rochester Road was a conditional rezoning also. as I recall. Was it not? I thought that was a conditional rezoning site.
I don't recall that.
No.
Okay.
But we went out of our way to add trees beyond what the ordinance required, even with that, whenever we needs to make sure we keep as much of a shield, because there's a neighborhood, in fact, right across the street. But the goal was to try and make a project that's hopefully a win-win for everyone, including the neighbors, frankly, and the city. Unfortunately, having worked with Tim Hortons on other sites, as been mentioned already, without a drive-through, there's really no Tim Hortons that can be developed. I wish I could tell you that it could be. So we'd love to get your feedback and suggestions. We're certainly open to them. Our hope will be to see if we can make a project work, for the city and for the neighborhood and for Tim Hortons. Before we got too far in putting out plans and applications and petitions and so forth, that could be that.
I think you got a sense of where we're going. May not be where you wanted to go, but that's where we are right now.
Okay. No drive-through?
No drive-through. That's my sense of what we said. Now, we haven't taken a vote, but I think from the comments, it appears that that's the way we're leaning. But we haven't got a site plan before us either, so.
No, absolutely. And that's what we wanted to understand. So, I mean, we can try to play with it.
Yes, Mr. Schultz.
If you can get the resident to the west to come and tell us that they don't mind having a drive-through right next door to them, I'll support you.
So you got one vote now.
Mr. Chairman, from a process standpoint too, so everybody's aware, to even consider it, obviously, as a neighborhood node site type B or whatever, whatever it is, it's the lower intensity classification for the node. That entire node is the lower classification. It would first have to be up classified to the higher intensity classification within the neighborhood node zoning district, which is actually an action of the zoning administrator. We've talked about that process, and in a lot of those cases, what Brent's going to probably be doing, or we'll bring them before the Planning Commission for your recommendation on what the zoning administrator should do in terms of reclassification. And then that would be the first hurdle. The next one would be the fact that use group 6 is allowed in the more intense neighborhood node category, but only as a special land use, so then it would go through the special land use process. So just so you know, the other alternative option for the applicant is to try to rezone out of neighborhood node district altogether to one of our commercial categories. I think the lower intensity one allows drive-throughs by special use, but at any rate, there's a few different administrative paths that the applicant can take. Also, use variances are now available in the new zoning ordinance. So just so everybody knows it, it could come to you in any number of forms.
Or all of them.
We didn't want to bog down the discussion on what the options are. There are there's at least 3 options available for relief, for them to move forward. But I think what they're looking for is kind of, what's it going to take? What's it going to take for them to be able to move forward to get your support?
How can I serve coffee?
That type of thing.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Sevena.
Mr. Stratt's got Mr. Schultz has a pretty good memory. It was almost a conditional rezoning, the Rochester Tim Hortons. There was an EP required, so there's an EP strip to the west, and there was also kind of a handshake deal, or a kind of the applicant agreed not to put an access to any type of driveway on Vanderpool. So Mr. Casab went to the podium and said, "I promise you, it's not going to happen," and it didn't happen. He was true to his word. No surprise. And so it was kind of a conditional rezoning. And I believe this particular case kind of was spearheaded us coming up with conditional rezoning provisions. It was this case. So that's my recollection, anyways.
Well, we promised. We tried.
Did you understand what he just said about conditional rezoning?
Well, absolutely. We've pursued those.
That may be another option.
Yep, thank you.
Next item on the agenda is for public comments, but seeing no one in the room, I think we will just open and close that and go to commissioners' comments. Start with you, Mr. Stratt.
Your comment.
Mr. Edmonds.
Yes, last week I had a chance to attend the Complete Streets workshop, and it was, I understand it's legislation that's already been passed, And I guess I would just ask that we consider, did we ever consider doing anything in terms of a project with the complete streets?
The zoning ordinance includes language with regards to complete streets extensively. In a few locations it does. And then, of course, our design guidelines basically incorporate the elements that you would have learned about in complete streets. And I believe the form-based code districts in particular really have an emphasis on that. And then when we talk about the thoroughfare plan and other stuff, I believe, yes, we did try to incorporate complete streets ideas in the zoning ordinance.
Is there federal funding for that type of thing?
I don't know if there's specific funding for like converting streets to complete streets. I think what you're going to find is that complete streets will come more as a potential criteria for competitive applications, that kind of thing. Or if grant money, it'd be probably more of a state level thing, but if you had, for instance, MDOT money going into a project, they may or may not be looking more or less favorably on complete streets elements being incorporated in the plans.
Well, I just think that if we're going to be a more walkable and bikeable community, it seems to me like we could at least try an area, a pilot area and a project, and paint's fairly inexpensive, to make a bike lane, so.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that the city has really considered it and in doing some of their, pathway planning, which was kind of put on hold when the economy went a little bit south, but I know the master plan speaks of it, the zoning ordinance speaks of it, particularly for private development, and absolutely it's on our radar screen.
Thank you.
Mr. Olben.
In looking at that Tim Hortons plan that was just in front of us, it seemed like the neighborhood nodes was to get us away from cars and in toward pedestrians. And as I looked at that plan, that site was totally dominated by vehicles, parking, and movement as opposed to a gathering of people. And I think because that site is only half a mile from Beaumont, if we had something was more of a traditional restaurant, coffee shop type thing, that may do well there and be more in thinking of something that would enhance the neighborhood and get people to congregate there.
Mr. Schultz.
I just want to find out what the score is.
Okay, we'll move on. Mr. Maxwell. 0-0 so far. Mr. Hagel.
I'll make this brief. I was searching the city site looking for the definition of an end node. And I happened to realize that our acting city planner is now our full director of planning. So I just want to congratulate him in front of the audience.
Congratulations.
It's about time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. I want to I guess, apologize for putting two study items on a regular meeting. But as you can appreciate, when we get people coming to us with applications like this, time is of the essence. So, we're trying to work with developers to encourage redevelopment, encourage, if people are willing to invest, a lot of time and money in the city of Troy, we try to accommodate them. So, we generally try to have these types of items on the fourth Tuesday, but because of challenges with time, we put it on tonight's
That's
agenda.
no problem. I encourage you to do that again.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Stratt.
Just a comment. When everybody sits back and they talk like this, old guys like me can't hear too well. So I encourage everybody to speak into the microphone, Mr. Chairman.
I got hearing aids on too, so.
Yeah.
I'm handicapped. Mr. Sabaton, any comments besides what you've done?
None.
Al?
No comments.
Zach?
No.
Boy. Well done. The meeting's adjourned.
0-0 in the second.